we'll start that. Welcome to the New Haven Register.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. So, thank you for having us today. Brian Garcia, President and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank. I'm Craig Connolly, Director of Marketing. So yeah, I guess we wanted to talk a little bit about what the Connecticut Green Bank is and how it fits in the overall landscape of energy here in the state of Connecticut. You know, Connecticut has a long history of addressing clean energy policies in the state. It goes back to electric deregulation in the late 90s. Created a conservation and load management fund, created a clean energy fund. But back in 2011, Governor Malloy, with bipartisan support of the legislature, passed a major piece of energy legislation called Public Act 1180 that really restructured the way clean energy was being dealt with in the state, effectively taking an organization called the Clean Energy Fund and creating the Connecticut Green Bank. So we are the nation's first state-level green bank. And what that is essentially an organization that takes public resources and uses it to mobilize more private investment in the state economy. So when we were created back in 2011, we administer something called a Clean Energy Fund. It is a surcharge on ratepayer bills, 1 mil per kilowatt hour, which is 1/10 of a penny per kilowatt hour, about $7 to $10 per year per household. That comes into the Connecticut Green Bank. There's a sister fund that is 6 mils, 6/10 of a penny per kilowatt hour, that's administered by the two utilities, Avangrid, United Illuminating, as well as Eversource. That goes to supporting energy efficiency projects for homeowners, for businesses. So what we do with our mill is the traditional way of trying to support clean energy markets is to provide subsidies to an end user, which is to say go to a home or a business and buy down the cost of an energy improvement, say new windows, new appliances, a solar PV system, and buy down that cost to make it more affordable for the homeowner. That's the typical approach. And the challenge of that is that as markets grow, they become limited based on the amount and availability of this public subsidy, and they grow to that level of availability. And in some cases, you have an ebb and flow of policies and politics that says, you know what, this year I don't want to give as much to this initiative. So the market fluctuates based on policies. So what we do is different. What we do is now provide consumers with the tools that they need to finance clean energy. So we work with local community banks and credit unions throughout the state, for example, where we want to get them to lend to households at affordable interest rates, long-term maturities, 12-year loans, to help them finance those energy improvements. So we've got a product, for example, we call the Smarty Loan, with, 10 community banks and credit unions now in the program. And what we do is we provide a loss reserve for those community banks and credit unions to be able to come into this market. This is a new market for them. They're used to auto lending and deposits from homeowners, but they're not used to energy lending. So what we're trying to do is to get their investment into supporting the energy policy of the state, which is to deliver cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable sources of energy. So they're now offering homeowners loans at low interest rates, long-term maturities, and we provide to them a second loss protection. So we say to them, the first 1.5% of losses of the loans that you lend out to your members, you take as a loss to your bank. You're used to underwriting loans. So therefore, we want you to continue doing that business. We're not going to be the first loss. You continue to do your business. But we will take the second loss. So the next 7.5% of losses we will take as the Green Bank. And what we know from the data is that across the country, people who make energy improvements pay their bills back. Not only their utility bills, but they also pay their financing bills back. So the loss percentage is low. Right now in the Smarty Loan, we've helped finance about $20 million of projects in households, and we've seen one loss in that portfolio, so less than 1%, easily less than 1% of losses. But what's important here is that the local lenders are seeing that this is a high-performing area that they can lend to households for. So what we want to do at the end of the day is not be in the transaction. We want them to actually see that this is a good market. They can come in, they don't need the government to be in the market at all, and they can just continue to finance these sorts of projects. So we have evidence of this. We can get into some of our other products in a second. But stepping back to the policy, when you start looking at the policy objectives of the state to deliver this cleaner, cheaper, more reliable, and you start to put a number on how much investment is going to be required to achieve these climate change objectives, these clean energy policy objectives, you quickly realize that it's going to require billions and billions of dollars in investment. So how can we unlock more local investment from our local community banks and credit unions, state, regional banks, and national banks to provide their capital to end-use consumers so that we have the level of investment necessary to achieve those policy goals? That's what we do as an organization. So we're entrusted with this clean energy fund for ratepayers. We use it to work with various investors in the market to create products. We go into some of those products. And those products, at the end of the day, finance clean energy improvements for homeowners and businesses, making them better off from a cash flow basis. So if you're a homeowner and you want to install solar PV, or you're a business and you want to make clean energy improvements to your property, we want that debt service payment that they're going to be making for those clean energy improvements to be lower than the energy savings they're receiving from those improvements, so that they're immediately better off economically. And that's what we do. So we provide them the upfront capital to finance those improvements. They're better off economically. And because of that, more people want to do clean energy, not just because it's good for the environment, but because it's good for their bottom line. So that's our role in the market of encouraging more investment to help customers support clean energy deployment.
Do you have initiatives that you currently have before state government or before the legislature that you are supporting, or you are proposing, that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, so there are a couple of policy proposals before the Energy and Technology Committee currently. One is a program, it's a technical fix, a program called Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. CPACE is the acronym. This is a policy that was passed back in 2013, but what it does is it enables businesses, commercial and industrial customers, multifamily property owners, nonprofits, to finance clean energy improvements through a benefit assessment on their property. So just like they're financing a sewer assessment or a sidewalk assessment, they would finance clean energy improvements, a new boiler, solar PV on the roofs, new windows. And that then gets put onto their local property tax. And why that's important is because it allows us to attract more long-term lending, 20 years, 25 years, to finance these improvements at affordable interest rates. So you're talking about, 5 to 6.5% interest rates, depending upon the length of the assessment. And what that's done is throughout the state of Connecticut, you have municipalities that have to opt in to CPACE. They have to say, we are willing to offer this benefit assessment to our businesses, where they can put this assessment on their property, make these improvements, and then pay for those improvements through the property tax. They have to get the consent of the existing lender on the property to do that. So we're making some technical fixes, proposing some technical fixes on CPACE. It's done very well in Connecticut. We've financed over $100 million worth of projects, saving those customers nearly $200 million in energy costs over the life of the project. So again, you want to save more than you invest. That's the goal of us in general. So what we're now trying to do, working with the industry, is to see if this vehicle can be used for homeowners. So can this same mechanism be applied for us when we go home, so that we can put solar on our roofs and have a 20-year benefit assessment on our property, so that if I effectively leave my home and somebody else comes in, they step into the home and they have the benefit of this new energy system and these energy savings that are coming, that they'll continue to repay for that benefit assessment on the property. So it's called residential PACE. It's a policy that's being discussed and debated in Hartford.
But every community would have, any community that would have to buy into it.
They have to opt in, exactly. So it leaves it completely to the municipality in terms of determining whether or not they want to support it. On CPACE, we've had 139 of our 169 cities and towns have opted into CPACE. It represents about 95% of all commercial and industrial office space in the state. So if you are a business and you're in one of those towns, you can use CPACE to finance clean energy improvements. And residential would work the same way. You'd opt in. But you can imagine that towns have to make a decision to do this, and they'll do it for economic development reasons, to attract companies. They'll do it to, lower energy costs for their companies. But they also have to collect the payment and then remit it back to the green bank so that we can pay off the improvements. So when you think about residential, you're now talking about a larger number of transactions that has to happen. So that's part of the discussion too.
So if I'm just a regular homeowner in Connecticut, let's say I'm just an average homeowner in Connecticut, and I decide that I want solar panels on my house. And so I call up, I'm just going to make it up, I call up, Sunshine, I call up Sunshine Solar Panel Company, and Sunshine says, oh, wow, your house is perfect, you face in the right direction, you don't have too many trees, and blah, blah, blah. So is the Green Bank going to help me make a deal with Sunshine Solar Company, or do I have to do that on my own? Is there any interaction in that way that helps regular people?
Yeah. So yes, we would help you, but we wouldn't necessarily help you with the deal making per se. Our role in that regard is to give you as much unbiased, objective information about the industry, about what you're up against, so you can make the most informed decision when you do engage with the contractor. So before you would call that contractor, we would like you to go to a website that we even have positioned as the trusted resource in solar PV in Connecticut, and it's Go Solar CT. And there you can learn from the beginning to, in the beginning of your consideration cycle, to what to do after you have the panels, what to expect, and who you should be speaking with. And when you get to the point where you're in the next tick of the cycle and you really want to engage a contractor, there is a tool on that site to help you navigate that too, with a list of the contractors and comparison shop too. So we don't take any kind of financial interest in that at all. It's just to give, like I said, unbiased information. Now, when you do go solar and you find a contractor that you're comfortable with, that it works with your economics, then we have a different role in that process, and that's when the RSIP would kick in, and that's the Residential Solar Investment Program. And that is really the incentive that we administer to bring the installed costs down for a solar installation. It's paid in the event that you do a purchase rather than a lease. We would pay the incentive to the contractor, and they would pass the savings on to you. They would adjust their install rate. So you would still enjoy the benefits of the incentive, but you wouldn't be collecting like a check from the Connecticut Green Bank.
So where I was talking before about the markets that become reliant on these government subsidies, so the interesting thing about this RSIP program is that the incentives have declined over time. And we've said to the market that the goal is to remove these incentives from the market over time. So we started the program in March of 2012. We have since, over that period of time, reduced the incentive by 80%. So the incentive is now roughly equivalent to the value of 10% of the installed cost of the system. So that's allowed us to get more out of the incentive dollars that we have, which has been great. But what's more important is it's by partnering with local lenders and private investors, we're putting in the hands of households the tools they need to be able to finance those projects themselves. Because at some point, there's not going to be that incentive, and we want the market to continue to thrive. And what's happened in Connecticut is, even though we've reduced the incentive by 80%, the number of installations has increased really dramatically. I mean, it's not uncommon nowadays for you to drive down the street and see a solar PV, system installed in your neighborhood. It's just become much more commonplace. And if you look at I was taking a look at some of the materials today, a homeowner may pay 13 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour that solar PV system is producing, when if they were just purchasing from the grid, they may be paying 20 to 22 cents. So solar is helping them save immediately, and that's the goal. By providing financing and access to capital, we can lower the cost of clean energy, make it accessible to consumers, while at the same time reducing their energy burden, household energy burden.
What would a typical residential install go for? 10,000, 20,000? I'm not knowledgeable.
So before everything, it would probably run on average about $30,000. And that's the sticker shock, right? People are like, how do I deal with $30,000? Now, the state, through the Connecticut Green Bank's RCIP incentive, will provide about 10% of that as a rebate, as Craig mentioned, to the installer on behalf of the homeowner. So it's about 10%. So $33,000 off 30 takes you to 27. Then you've got a federal investment tax credit. That's 30% of the value of the remaining. That federal tax credit has been in place for quite some time. It phases out in 2022, so it gradually goes down, just like we're doing with incentives here in Connecticut. So that will take you to about $18,000 to $20,000 after all your federal and state incentives. And that's where now your local community bank and credit union coming in to finance the rest of that becomes an opportunity for you. So if you want to own, that's the model. You take out a loan and you're going to finance about $20,000 for the solar PV system. You're going to save more economically from the savings than you're paying for your loan, which is good. You want to be better off. If you want to finance it, if you don't want to own it, you can also lease it or sign a power purchase agreement. So some of the prices I've seen in Connecticut is about 13 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour. So you'll have somebody pay you, you'll be paying 13 to 14 cents for that solar PV, power from solar PV, as opposed to paying the 20 to 22 cents that you're paying for your utility. So there are a couple of ways of financing it. But it's more affordable and accessible to anyone. And back in, as our board started to see the growth of deployment and the level of private investment coming into Connecticut, they said, okay, this is all well and good, but let's take a look at the numbers and see where these systems are going. And we had UConn do a study, and it became very clear that the non-low to moderate income households were installing solar, and the moderate income and low income households were really far behind. So our board said, it's all well and good, we're seeing lots of investment coming into Connecticut, but we need to ensure that there is ensured prosperity of all communities in Connecticut. So we want to see solar PV deployed in low to moderate income households. You guys go figure it out. The numbers were really startling. Like, we had to at that time, deploy 10 times more projects in the low income market to be on parity with the non-low income market. So it's startling. So our board said, that's unacceptable. You guys go figure out a way of deploying more solar in low to moderate income communities. So we went out, we issued a request for proposals. We said, we want to find installers who are willing to serve this market and make solar affordable and accessible to low to moderate income families. And we found a company from New Orleans, Louisiana, called Posigen. And this is the other part of the Bridgeport story. We were able to worked with Posigen to allow them to come up to establish a beachhead in Bridgeport for the Northeast. We pulled the capital together for them to finance projects on low to moderate income households. So they target specifically census tracts with low to moderate income households. They offer a lease product to a homeowner. So every month you'll pay a monthly payment somewhere between $50 to $100 depending upon the size of the installation. That will be over a 20-year period. They then also offer the homeowner, they will say, we will do $2,500 worth of weatherization. We'll seal your windows, we'll do some insulation in your home up front, and the homeowner then pays $10 per month to receive that service. What we're seeing now is the statistics in our low to moderate income tracts now only, we still have work to do, but now only needs 3 times more deployment as opposed to 10 times more. So in 2.5 years, we've been able to close that gap and bring low-income households into this market on parity. We won't be satisfied until we're on parity or in fact ahead of it, but Posigen is delivering installs in Bridgeport, they're up in Hartford, they're in New London. They're focused on areas where we know there are heavy numbers of low to moderate income households. And again, it's delivering those homeowners cheaper electricity. When you think about household, there's something in the industry we call energy burden, which is the percent of your household income you spend on energy. For low to moderate income households, 5, 10, 15% of your income can go to energy when it doesn't have to. So the more money we can put back in their pockets, the more they can invest in other household needs. You know, they could save for their child's college, their children's college. We want to help them thrive by reducing their energy burden, and that's what we've been doing with Posigen.
Do you remember the percentage of EE measures that were done too? That was a pretty impressive.
Yeah. So there's a statistic. So the Connecticut's energy policy is to deliver comprehensive improvements. So every time you're at a house, the policy would prefer that the homeowner not just do solar, but do solar, put in a more efficient boiler, HVAC, efficient windows, lighting, appliances. The policy wants you to do it all. And it's been a challenge. Solar, people are very attracted to it. They can see it on the street. They know who has it. It's kind of a cool thing. Efficiency has been really hard to get homeowners to see the value of why should I invest in these sorts of things. What we're seeing with Posigen is with that $10 a month offer is that 2/3 of households that install solar are taking that energy improvement offer. In comparison to a great audit program, there's a program called Home Energy Solutions, which everyone should do. You can just go to energizect.com. You're seeing 25 to 30% of those households that do an energy audit do the weatherization. In the Posigen example, we're seeing 2/3 of households do the weatherization. So it's starting to unlock how we might go after efficiency savings through a solar lens. Still lots to be learned from it, but we're seeing more uptake.
So the weatherization programs and things that a lot of utilities offer that, like we'll come to your house and do it and it will save you money and you only pay like $50 if you do it by the end of the year. Like, do you guys give them money to do that, or?
So our utility partners do that. So that program is called Home Energy Solutions. A household will pay $129 to participate in that. They'll get about $1,100 to $1,200 worth of services. New lights, they'll put in water aerators, they'll check your gas units, make sure everything's kind of running efficiently. It's really a good payback.
Windows, leaks around the doors.
Exactly. They'll do that, the blower door test. So you probably
We've done it twice, yeah.
So that's telling them how leaky your home is, right? So that then you can weatherize. The payback on Home Energy Solutions is like 6 months. Everyone should do it. They're even going to give you a home energy score. So the DOE has a score. It will rank your house before and after. And we're starting to see the real estate community use that ranking in the resale of homes, that you want to be more efficient. But so the utilities run the Home Energy Solutions program, and then they offer incentives for homeowners that want to do insulation, in their attics and their walls. If you want to install an air source heat pump, have you ever seen these kind of window hanging units? They look like window hanging air AC units. They're called renewable air source heat pumps. They're really efficient. The state really needs to deploy more of those. They both heat the home and cool the home. It will help our climate policies. But they have a whole set of programs for homeowners. And what we do is, so you think about what's the gap after these incentives, what's the gap I need to finance? All we're trying to do is to provide that homeowner with the easy tool. Some of them may pay it out of their savings, out of their own, but we want to give everyone access to this market. So that's why we work with local community banks and credit unions through the Smarty One.
Really competitive rates.
Do you, I can tell that there's financial data, that there's, measurements you can do about the efficiency of your home and whatnot, and which I thought was a very interesting point. But are there metrics that show the Connecticut Green Bank, working for this long in the state of Connecticut through all its programs, have prevented and estimated, this much carbon from entering the atmosphere, or this much, change the carbon footprint of this many homeowners? Is there any kind of data like that?
Yeah, so there is data, and the metrics are getting better. So we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary in January. We've mobilized $1 billion of investment into Connecticut's clean energy economy. $160 million of that came through the Green Bank. The other $840 million came from private sources. That's created nearly 13,000 jobs, from the construction jobs to do all the work, to the reuse of the savings by the households, investing in the local economy. We've deployed over 200 megawatts of in-state renewable energy, and that comes to an estimate of 2.6 million metric tons of CO2. So what that means in context, so annually Connecticut emits about 40 million metric tons of CO2. So with the projects that we put in place, they will reduce 2.6 million metric tons. So a small part of a big job that has to happen. The tools to estimate this have gotten better, and we've been working really closely with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the EPA. In fact, our board just approved this week a tool that the EPA uses that improves the estimate of these emissions, SOx, NOx, CO2 emissions, particulate matter from clean energy deployment. So we're very numbers-minded too in the social benefit that's created. But in the grand scheme, when you think of Connecticut from a CO2 perspective, we're really aggressive on global warming. Back in 2008, there was the Global Warming Solutions Act that was passed that establishes a long-term target of 80% reductions by 2050. That's the number that scientists believe is important, that will put us on a path to keeping our temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius in terms of increasing temperatures. But so we've had a long history of policy to address it. I've been in state service since the early 2000s when we deregulated electricity. Governor Rowland and Governor Rell led on this issue. I think Governor Malloy would say that he's towing the line. So it's a bipartisan issue in Connecticut of confronting climate change. There is the Governor's Council on Climate Change, which recognizes that to get to the long-term target, we need to decarbonize our electric grid, and we need to move our vehicles from gasoline to electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles. Transportation represents 40% of Connecticut's greenhouse gas emissions. It's the largest emitting sector in Connecticut. Electricity is about 20%. And then how we heat and cool our buildings, the thermal load on buildings, is the second highest emitting sector. That's nearly 40% as well as transportation. And that's why I was mentioning these air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps. These are technologies that are efficient and cleaner, But we need a lot of them deployed in order to achieve those longer-term greenhouse gas targets, and that's a big part of the policy discussion now, the GC3. But so we're doing our part, chipping away at the greenhouse gas emissions.
I just want to make sure I clarify. You said it was 40 million metric tons of CO2 a year in Connecticut, and you guys have reduced by 2.6 million?
2.6 million.
Okay. And that's a year?
Why I was smiling before, when you were asking that, is because we just happen to have illustration.
Oh, good,
okay, no, I didn't.
It just kind of walks through it, and I printed it off before, I updated it this
Yeah.
morning, but that
So
might
how does that
help.
relate to
Thank you.
what
The
you're-
society
Can I keep
benefits
this?
on the, oh yeah, of course.
I'm just trying to,
Yeah, it's probably, let's say 200,000 metric tons. You know, you divide that number by 10, somewhere in there.
and
But-
that's like roughly per year what you're
Exactly,
saving.
yeah. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to, you can imagine next year, we want that lifetime value of CO2 to continue increasing more and more, because now we're displacing emissions over a longer period of time.
How many cars is that, the equivalent of?
Oh, we have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have it, it's a lot. It's a lot and growing, I mean, so it's a lot, but it's not where it needs to be, right? I mean, I think that's what we're excited about is the old model of subsidies. So if you step back and you think about the macro picture, you know, I think the United Nations would say the Sustainable Development Goals that we need to achieve by 2030 is going to require $90 trillion over the next 15 years around the globe to confront climate change. Well, that comes to about $800 per person per year for the next 15 years. In Connecticut, when we started through the Clean Energy Fund, the subsidy model delivered $8 per person per year. The Green Bank model now, we're at $80. So we've increased it by an order of magnitude, but we need to do another order of magnitude in order to be like on par with the level of investment, just to give you a sense of scale. So as you can imagine, as I talk internally with our team, it's great. We've done a 10 times multiplier, but we need 100 times in order to be where we need to be, in order to set an example for other regions, other countries that you can do it.
And what kind of support are you getting from the current administration and the legislature? I mean, given the kind of dire straits Connecticut's in right now in terms of its deficit and budget, and potential layoffs of thousands of Connecticut workers.
Yeah, so we've got great support from the legislative leadership. The governor putting the idea out there in 2011 had really strong support. You could imagine using limited public funds to mobilize and attract private investment, that's very appealing to both sides of the aisle, delivering jobs, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They've got a really tough situation up there, right? I mean, they're working to put together a budget, a $40 billion budget for 2018 and 2019. They've got estimated budget deficits of 1.7 billion and 1.9 billion in the next upcoming fiscal year. So their jobs aren't easy. I mean, they have a really difficult task. They're looking at aid to municipalities, state services. I read somewhere that they're reducing the budget to bury the poor. I mean, to be a decision maker in a position that has to make those decisions is not one that I don't think many of us would want to be in. But what we've done over the last 5 years is mobilize more investment in the state economy. That's what we're about. So we're here drawing in, using our limited public resource to draw in more private investment into the economy. That will naturally create jobs, those who are doing the work. It's helping reduce the energy burden on households and businesses, lowering their energy costs. They can spend more, save more, reinvest more. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it's doing all those things. I think, as we work in this session, what we have to realize is that we have to trust in our legislative leaders that they will ultimately make the decisions that are in the best interest of the state of Connecticut. And, we've always received great support from them, but it's a tough time.
What about the federal administration? seeing any more struggles based on some decisions and changes that are happening on the national level?
So there's a couple of things. So if you come back to the climate change world, right, so there are two things that President Trump is looking at. One he's already taken action on, which is the Clean Power Plan. This is a national strategy. It's a national regulation to reduce emissions from stationary power plants, 32% over the next 25 years. So President Obama, Gina McCarthy, who is the former commissioner of DEP here in Connecticut, the administrator of the EPA under President Obama, led that effort. And President Trump has been very outspoken. He's not going to support the Clean Power Plan. So that's one area from the national perspective. Connecticut's in a much better place because we're cleaner than the rest. The second area that President Trump is looking at is the Paris Agreement. So the international presence of where the U.S. plays on that stage. So back in December of 2015, through what's called the Conference of the Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in Paris, everyone got together and agreed on three things: that each country is going to go back and develop its own strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that we're going to figure out together how we adapt to the impacts of climate change, because we're starting to see the impacts, and then third, that we need to find out ways of enabling more private investment to provide these solutions. President Trump hasn't stated yet what he's doing on the international stage. You can imagine it plays into all negotiations on the number of really complex international policy issues that they're dealing with, but has pulled funding from international programs. So that's the reality of the country's position on climate. Now, domestically, like in Connecticut, and I think this is what's the interesting story about it all is, it was back in 2001 in Westbrook, Connecticut. I call it the Westbrook Resolution under, Governor Rowland. He brought all the New England governors and the Eastern Canadian premiers together, and this is where the first climate change plan was created. They set short-term targets. Let's achieve 1990 levels by 2010. Let's reduce by 10% by 2020. They set those two targets. And that happened here in Connecticut, and that's throughout the region. Now, with regard, I mentioned the Global Warming Solutions Act. That established a long-term target, which is an 80% reduction by 2050. So, Connecticut is moving aggressively regardless of what's happening, across the country, from the Clean Power Plan perspective to the Paris Agreement. I think what you're seeing now are a number of states and subnational governments saying we need to act regardless of what the federal position is, and Connecticut has taken that leadership on since 2001.
So here, in Connecticut, we can control what we can control and have aggressive goals and targets for lowering greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gas doesn't, stop at state borders. There are other states that have lower standards, and how much of an impact does that have on us?
Yeah. So, from an air quality perspective, a big one, right? I mean, I think Connecticut is downwind of very polluting states, right? So we tend to import pollution from states that don't have as stringent of regulations as we do. So that's a bad thing.
What would some of those be?
So, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the Mid-Atlantic states. The challenge is, thinking outside of how can we mobilize more investment in clean energy in those areas, that would be good for Connecticut's airship, if that could happen. That would be a really, really, really big improvement. But I think in terms of what we're doing here in Connecticut, so this green bank model has become the subject of conversation across the country as a different approach for accelerating clean energy. When Connecticut passed its policy in 2011, you saw Governor Cuomo in 2013 create the New York Green Bank. You saw, as a result of Hurricane Sandy, Governor Christie create the New Jersey Energy Resilience Bank. You got Governor Raimundo in 2016 who created the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. We just spoke to several weeks ago the District of Columbia, which is going to create its own green bank. So a lot of people are thinking about how can government do a better job using its limited resources to make these places the location for more private investment. My hope would be that more of those states, the mid-Atlantic states, we can figure out a way of putting more investment there, because if we clean their air, we're cleaning our air. You know, to your point, we can be, zero emitting. And even from a global warming perspective, we could be zero emitting. But what are we doing in the grand scheme of things? I think what we're doing is we're leading by example and showing people another way.
With the Green Bank, do you have any involvement in mass transportation to take cars off the highways in any role?
So no. We had a conversation with our board about a year ago. We had our comprehensive plan, our 2-year plan, and the board asked that we include in the plan a section. Right now we are defined by statute to support clean energy. And the definition of clean energy is renewable energy, energy efficiency, alternative fuel vehicles and infrastructure. We're starting to get into electric vehicles a little bit, trying to understand what we can do in that area. But the board asked that we look at what's happening across the world in terms of this model and whether or not it can be applied to sustainability broadly, transportation, waste reduction, agriculture, local food and agriculture. And we think there are examples where it is applying. Our colleagues in the UK invest heavily in recycling infrastructure. Our colleagues in Australia, are focusing a lot on water quality. So I think we don't do it yet, but I think this model of being smarter with our resources can get us there.
Great. Well, anybody else have any questions?
No, I was just going to follow up just in the interest of full disclosure with Gina McCarthy that Brian had mentioned. She recently joined our board of directors, so we're very happy about that. And one other thing, if I can just build on what you had said or alluded to, and to your question about it doesn't stop at state borders, right? The air quality. I think what's as important for us to put up these results is that we see ourselves and the responsibility of leading a movement as far as the Green Bank movement. And what we're demonstrating is an instrument that can mitigate climate change, but also yield significant economic and financial benefits. So I don't want that point to be lost. I mean, we are really fortunate to have the political climate to have gotten us, help us get off the ground, and we have been able to demonstrate an awful lot of success in how well this model works, and as a result, we're having more states, municipalities from across the country come to us asking us how to replicate the model. And the more success we have, the more attractive it is to those states that may have those